Hi everyone, I am Tyler Friesen and I'm here today to go through our BTMA 736 final presentation focused around Calgary housing price predictors. So other than myself, also had Marcelo Reno and Baiji Wang on the presentation team. So our motivations. We wanted to figure out what are the key factors that drive the housing price in a community. So our motivation behind this is we also wanted to see what unexpected relationships exist within housing prices and what might they mean. We also wanted to see if we could answer this well enough to create predictions from this. So we chose Calgary as the target city to test our assumptions. Calgary is the largest city in the Western Canadian province of Alberta, and Calgary has a population of 1.3 million people. So in all, there are over 180 distinct neighborhoods within the city limits. So we collected data from all over the internet. We mainly relied on the City of Calgary open data, which included things like the census, crime reports, community assessments, and more. So we also took other complementary information like historical oil prices. So moving forward, we largely ended up looking at items such as housing type, population density, type of family, number of kids, neighborhood complaints regarding property assessments, the distance from the core. We actually looked at the number of trees and as well the crime rate. So this is just a small sample of all the features we looked at, and we actually dove into some of these in quite a bit of detail. So, for example, we looked at development permits in the various different neighborhoods within Calgary, and as you can see, communities along the Bow River and the inner city have higher numbers of rebuilds and higher numbers of development permits. So very mature communities, such as Lower Silver Spring and Dalhousie, have very few developments. And looking at public trees, so these are trees that are actually maintained by the City of Calgary. Mature communities have higher tree density, and communities that are along rivers or other water bodies such as lakes have higher tree density as well. So just to show you a little bit more detail, what we actually ended up doing is creating these plots in a separate software. So I can walk you through right now what these look like. So we use Spotfire, and what you can see from this is there's a very dynamic response. So you're going to be able to see, for example, I'm looking at the property assessments right now. You can figure out the median property values in each of the neighborhoods, and it's directly represented. So we also did these for all of the other graphics you've seen so far, as well as resident complaints regarding property assessments, which can be seen here. The business permits, which were mentioned earlier. And lastly, we looked at crime. So as you can see, these data visualizations give a very valuable way of identifying potential trends and things that stand out, even before we start getting into the real data analysis. So it gave us a bunch of good things to start testing right off the bat. All right, now we will hop back into the presentation. So, as you can see, when we take a look at crime, the downtown and the northeast have higher crime. If you look, the higher population density areas also tend to have more crime. Looking at the business permits, we can see that the downtown area has the highest business density, and business densities tend to form almost clusters. So we'll look at this a bit more later. So as you can see regarding the property assessment values themselves, the property values vary quite substantially geographically. So the inner city and west communities tended to have higher value. So what we had to do after taking this initial data compilation, we needed to process all of this data using the R programming language in order to gain the insights necessary to answer our original questions. And for that, we used various statistical analysis methods to determine the extent of the relationship among the relevant factors. And so, our findings. We ended up finding that the median housing price intercept for our predictive equation came out to around $412,000. Moving on to the next item, we can see that there are a higher concentration of single-family homes in a community, corresponding to higher values. Also, we found that the closer to the downtown core community is, the more valuable it is. We found that communities with lower population densities correspond to higher values. Higher property assessment complaints in a given neighborhood per person also corresponds to a higher property value. And strangely enough, lower business permits per resident corresponds to higher values. So what we could see is that these were the most substantial predictors in allowing us to form a forecast going forward and identify what a neighborhood might actually be worth. So, an interesting finding is that based on the data we had, crime does not appear to impact housing prices. We also found that tree concentration does not significantly impact housing prices. Now, our data only focused on the trees that are maintained by the city of Calgary, so there are a large number of trees that unfortunately we were unable to account for. And also, the relationship between business permits and housing value needs to be explored further. We think that there are some valuable insights that can be gained by digging further into the data that's available. All right, the impact. So, what can this tell us? This information and this model that we've developed, it can provide valuable information for potential investors. This model that we've developed has the ability to improve as we add additional census data and other information from the city. And as the model is refined, it can provide insight as to how new communities might differ, which is very valuable for investors, city planners, developers, and more. And it could be used for various different use cases. For example, it could identify how changes to existing communities might impact property tax revenues. All right. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for our next project. Thanks.